Hello watch enthusiasts. Now, I've been hoping to produce a video of this type for several months now, but until now I really haven't had the chance or or taken the opportunity rather. And as we draw nearer to the end of the year, I'd like to talk about 5 of what I find to be some of my favourite independent watch brands. Because we're so often seen buying watches from the larger conglomerates, for example the Richemont group or indeed the Swatch group. But in many ways, some of these smaller brands which operate independently or at least under a parent company which isn't one of these large corporations and isn't one of these large groups of brands can be very interesting and provide something very different for the buyer. And so today I'd like to talk about 5 of my favourites in this category, and 5 brands which I feel really set themselves apart with interesting stories and very interesting and different products. However, before I begin the video, I would like to mention this fantastic picture of a Xinyu 1 in this blacked out PVD finish by Dan Yukon. And this is on the Snups group, which is the Watch Guys. And the Watch Guys is a group on Snups, which is a social media platform for sharing pictures of your collections and interests, and where you can discuss matters of horology with myself and indeed other enthusiasts, and where I'll do my utmost to reply to any questions or video inquiries personally. And so today I have this fantastic Xinyu 1 to show you, which is a really glorious piece, and a great looking timepiece overall with a tremendous technical heritage and from a really brilliant brand. And so to join the group and enjoy all these additional features on the channel, do simply follow the link down below, which will take you directly to the group to be able to participate and contribute and really get the most out of this YouTube channel. And the first brand I'd like to mention is Doxa. And Doxa are a brand which I think I make no secret of the fact I admire enormously. This is a brand which was founded in 1889 by Georges Ducommun, and it remained very much a dress watch manufacturer until the 1960s. And they produced quite a great variety of different dress watches throughout that period, which actually offer remarkably good value these days in terms of vintage pieces. But the watch they're really known for and which has built their fame is of course the sub. And the first of these subs was released in 1967 after being developed since 1964. And this was developed in collaboration with major divers such as Claude Wesley, who was a French diver, in fact, who had grown to great repute and popularity by this point. And so as a result, Doxa released this model, the Sub 300T at this point, which was a dive watch which was unlike really anything else seen from other brands. Because this is probably the most utilitarian of designs seen in terms of the dive watch. Because we see the needs of the diver addressed very clearly in this timepiece, with a case which, in its style of cushion shape, provides a better grip on the bezel and a better seating on the wrist, whilst being relatively reasonably sized at 45 by 45mm in diameter and lug to lug, making it very wearable and extremely legible thanks to that dwarf hour hand and heavily enlarged minute hand. And I feel Doxa's importance is illustrated very clearly by the way that they've designed this watch to be a true tool for a diver in a way which was completely unprecedented. And though Rolex released their Submariner and their Sea Dweller models, these still didn't have, at least in my opinion, the focus that Doxa did with regards to providing exactly what the user needed. Because this was a timepiece which featured, for example, that iconic bezel. And the bezel of this watch really is a product of the fact that these were used by US Navy divers, and they used decompression tables, as was necessary, to be able to establish how long they could remain at certain depths. And so as a result, Doxa decided to incorporate this into the bezel of a watch, being an unprecedented feat, I suppose, and rather a task which does illustrate the way this brand was willing to innovate in new and interesting ways without the commercialised aspect which is so prevalent in watchmaking today. Equally, with their Conquistador version of the 300T, Doxa also released the first publicly available model of dive watch to feature a helium escape valve. And in many ways this was the reason why this watch gained so much popularity, because it was usable for professional divers who weren't affiliated with brands like Comex, for example, and who didn't work for these large primarily oil procuring companies. And so as a result, this watch was very much sought after by individuals who wanted to perform marine exploration in ways which would require the most extreme of equipment, but didn't have the affiliation with these larger commercial brands. And of course, by this point, it became very clear amongst a lot of circles that helium escape valves really were crucial, especially in this era of extreme exploration, in ways which were really unprecedented, in terms of being able to decompress safely after being submerged for a long period of time without the watch simply bursting as a result of helium ingress. And equally, though, the most important innovation I feel about these watches did come in the form of the dials. And this is because Doxa in many ways are the pioneer of the bright dialed sports watch, because they were the first brand to produce a bright orange dial for one of their watches. And this was as a result of their watches being tested in Lake Neuchâtel over the years of development, those 3 years of development from 1964 to 1967. And eventually the conclusion was found that orange was an excellent choice in terms of legibility, down to a depth of 30 feet. And of course, with modern information, in fact, having taken these watches, with a lot of people having taken these watches to greater depths, it has become apparent that orange, of course, is one of those colours that fades quite quickly, as that end of the spectrum doesn't have the same penetration through water as the opposite end. But nonetheless, these were extremely legible and a really pioneering step in terms of increasing legibility. And of course this came alongside the silver dials, the turquoise dials, the black dials, the dark blue dials and so on, which were tested. And of course a lot of these did continue to reach production, but this was the watch which made the orange dial of a professional dive watch truly iconic. And of course, to add to the heritage of this brand, they were of course used by Jacques Cousteau and his team for quite a while, simply due to the functionality of these watches, and the fact that they really do fit in with that idea of marine exploration in this robust, no-nonsense sort of build, and have been seen in a lot of shots of his wrist, which I think does add to the history and in fact the interest of this brand. And of course they do still produce these subs in the form of the 1200T and the various other models they have, which feature very similar cases to the originals, with ETA movements and increased water resistance over those originals, with water resistance bumped up to 1200 metres and up to 1500 metres in some cases, really making these watches very, very impressive in terms of what they offer to the consumer and in terms of the history which they have. Now for the second brand, it would have been very easy to simply use Sinn as the option for an innovative German brand, who are really doing an incredible amount to provide new and interesting innovation. But because I spend a lot of my time talking about Sinn, especially in my videos when it comes to good value sports watches, I thought Nomos would be a more interesting option in this video. And Nomos, as many of you know, are a German brand based in Glashütte, who were founded in 1990 by Roland Schwerzner, who founded this brand in Saxony. And they're a brand which has always provided this design which is very, very Bauhaus in its design, in terms of being very close to functionality as far as its main aim, and as far as being extremely legible due to its simplicity and the fact that it is very much a form-following function. These watches also have always followed this very clean design in terms of their cases, with fully polished finishes, and of course their most iconic design being the Tangente, with this cylindrical case and these wonderful styles of symmetrical and extremely geometrically considered lugs which jut out from the case and provide a wonderful looking dress watch, which is nothing like a lot of other watches on the market, and follows lines which are truly individual to the brand. As well as this, the attention to the individual detail is superb on these watches, with silvered dials and blued hands, which reflect the simplicity and the beauty and elegance of every part with extreme detail and care. However, it's the progress of this brand since 2005 that has made this brand, in my eyes, one of the most important individual and independent brands on the market. And the reason for that is that since 2005 they've used exclusively their own in-house movements. And this is impressive for the simple reason that building in-house movements is a very, very expensive practice. It requires a lot of time and work to be able to devise a movement from scratch. And so as a result, it's incredible that Nomos, which was a brand of only 15 years by that stage, was able to make this leap and provide in-house movements. Especially, this brand relied entirely upon its in-house movements, simply because they were the only movements that it produced. And in many ways this set the brand apart as a piece of horological importance, and not simply another budget or mid-range timepiece. And though their prices have risen somewhat away from the middle-of-the-range style of timepieces into the lower end of luxury, these watches certainly do provide a beauty and an elegance which is unprecedented at this price range. What's more is the fact that these movements are really beautifully finished with decorations, with blued screws, with a fantastic level of detailing on the bridges, in terms of Geneva stripes, for example, as well as perlage on various surfaces, which give a wonderful, wonderful aesthetic. And this is especially the case on some of the higher-end movements made by the brand. For example, the movements on the Luxe models, with gorgeous sunburst effects on the main plates of the movement, and cutouts and engravings which are far beyond what you would expect from a brand of this age. Especially, the brand is able to produce these movements and decorations at an incredibly reasonable price. For £1,000, you're able to get hold of a really beautifully made model, the club, for example, with an excellent quality movement and a really proven style of build, which has been seen to be an excellent option for buyers. And so as a result, I find this brand to be one of the most impressive on the market in terms of providing a really wonderful product, but also in terms of providing it at a reasonable price in a world where the prices of watches are forever increasing, which seems like an unending sort of spiral. And so brands like this provide a real breath of fresh air. The next brand I'd like to talk about are a very curious one, and this is the brand Vulcain or Vulcain, depending on how you pronounce it. And this is a brand which is relatively unknown and produces a range of very interesting wristwatches around the alarm wristwatch. And the fact of the matter is that this brand, founded in 1858, is credited with producing the first functional wristwatch with an alarm, the Cricket. And this was released in 1947 with a very interesting manually wound movement, which, rather than the usual situation where alarm movements were significantly larger and thus were used in pocket watches, this watch actually featured a movement which was perfectly reasonably sized to fit inside a wristwatch, but still have the sufficient amount of sound produced to wake the owner. And so as a result, this became a great success, really, and in its early years it was taken on by Harry Truman, the President of the United States post Second World War, as his personal wristwatch. And in terms of the historical use of the Cricket, this is a watch which is extremely well travelled in terms of what it's achieved. Because just to name a few of the adventures and events this watch has been incorporated in, for example, it was used quite extensively by the full team of Italian climbers who worked on the first climbing of K2 in 1954, and very famously this watch survived the trip very successfully, and which is, I suppose, a testament really to the quality of these watches, and certainly the fact that these were a genuine competitor to something like the Rolex Oyster in that era, of course also being associated with climbing. Similarly, these watches were also developed for diving, with the marine versions of these watches being extremely sought after today in terms of the originals, whilst a sort of a reproduction is still made by the brand, which was famously used in 1959 for the descent to 155 metres in Lake Maggiore by a very, very well-known diver. And this does add to the history of these watches and the fact this is a brand who were genuinely interested in innovation. And unfortunately, the brand has gone through financial troubles to this day, and to this day, in fact, has had financial difficulties in terms of backers. And so, the brand is now owned by a parent company. But in terms of what they do, they still are very true to their original work, and aren't a member of one of these large conglomerates like the Swatch Group, for example. And of course, one has to remember the fact that alarm watches are generally extremely expensive due to the additional complication, and the fact that one has to incorporate this complication into the movement itself, with prices generally ranging over the £7,000 or £8,000 mark at the very least for a decent alarm watch in terms of a modern build. By contrast, these watches start at around the £2,500 mark, which is remarkable by comparison, bearing in mind the fact that their movements are in-house and really don't carry anything over from other brands. And of course, their most well-known movement is the V10, being their bidirectional winding on the crown, being to wind the movement barrel as well as the alarm barrel. And this means that these watches are very different from other timepieces and offer a really fantastic option for a collection if you're after something a bit different. And of course, they do also produce their more high-end automatic versions, as well as the nautical model, for example, which is a tremendous-looking piece with a real history in terms of being a 300-metre diver and paying homage to that original dive watch, which was a proper alarm watch that operated underwater seamlessly. And so there's a fantastic range from this brand and a brilliant history and story behind them. Because, of course, these are watches which did define some of the expeditions and some of the wristwatches of some of the most important figures of the mid-20th century, which is a very interesting piece from a brand which is generally unknown and goes without saying is a piece which is very understated. Now, the penultimate brand is a brand founded by F.P.Journe, and of course this is F.P.Journe. And F.P.Journe was, still is in fact, a very, very high-degree horologist, who joined a horological school at 14 but was expelled at 16, and then studied the works of Breguet and other 18th and 17th century horologists under the tuition of his uncle. And he also worked with George Daniels, similarly the very famous horologist. And so as a result, he accumulated a knowledge and an ability which really is unseen in this era. However, his tuition was very much in the world of the 18th century pocket watch. And so as a result, his finishing in watches is truly unique on the watch industry today. And of course, if one act has to demonstrate the brilliance of this horologist, it would be the fact that in his mid-20s he produced his first tourbillon, which is an incredible feat, and it was in a quite large-scale pocket watch, which exhibits all the beauty of design of one of these 18th century pocket watches, which is remarkable really when one thinks about the way in which someone of this era could produce something of such beauty and such refinement. And Journe's first wristwatch, produced in 1991, was a fairly incredible tourbillon, with all the decoration of a traditional pocket watch, with bridges which aren't decorated in the way you would expect on a wristwatch, but rather engraved in a way that is typical of those 18th century pocket watches. Similarly, the way the dial is produced with that guilloché pattern and those various other patterns on it with those brushed sections and raised points are also all brought over from that classical style of manufacturing, which does show an incredible resistance, I suppose, to time, which is wonderful to see and in many ways alien to the usual high horology we see. And of course, as though an elephant in the room, there is that enormous tourbillon on the left-hand side of the case, which provides a gorgeous insight into the way the watch works. And certainly this is a piece which has shaped horology, especially in terms of smaller, independent and high horology manufacturers, really forever. And the brand as an entity only really began to exist in the very late 1990s. And before that, Journe had produced various movements for other brands, but decided to go his own way, which I think was a very good choice, because they've been able to produce these watches which are truly gorgeous in their design, and very much in keeping with the style which one would expect from an eminent watchmaker of this type. And their watches vary enormously and have so over the years, but their current range features some of the most iconic dress watches one sees, with a highlight being the chronomètre bleu, with this gorgeous tantalum case, which has this dark and mysterious tone, which is unlike really any other metal you see, and of course is a real epitome of a luxury metal, being rare and not often found. Additionally, the dial is this wonderful iridescent blue, and the movement is a real thing of beauty in a way which is very rarely seen in terms of handmade watches these days. Of course, the style is also typically of the brand, which is something I often have complaints about when a lot of brands produce very derivative-looking timepieces. This is a brand truly innovating in their own direction. And the case detailing is also very, very reminiscent of pocket watches, with models like the T30, which admittedly is a limited edition, which is now long discontinued, with these wonderful patterns on the sides of the case, and a movement which is almost identical to the piece in his first tourbillon pocket watch, but in this case shrunken to the size of a wristwatch, but retaining that wonderful finishing and those beautiful and elegant lines. And so I feel this is a brand which most certainly deserves a place on this list as far as beautiful and innovative and immensely different wristwatches go, which provides something really different to the buyer and something truly exclusive in a way not usually seen. And in a strange sort of way, MB&F, the final brand I'd like to talk about, take an opposing way of producing luxury wristwatches to F.P.Journe. Because this is a brand founded by Maximilian Buser, who was, prior to being the CEO of MB&F, was in fact the CEO of a section of Harry Winston, and similarly in the 90s senior manager at JLC. And so as a result he was no new beginner, if you will, to the world of wristwatches. But in 2005 he founded Maximilian Buser and Friends, or MB&F, and immediately started with the horological machines line, with incredible innovation and very, very curious designs going into these very modern and even futuristic dress watches. And in many ways these watches are an engineer's delight. They're fantastically engineered with incredible attention to detail, with regards to showing just enough of the movement to excite the owner, but without compromising the design of the watch in a way which is often the case with skeletonized watches. And these pieces follow alien contour lines and peculiar forms, with square shapes, with bathtub shapes, and even circular shapes in some cases, but executed in a way which simply isn't expected. And these show pieces which would normally be the centrepiece of a watch, such as a tourbillon, as a mere component of a much larger watch, which is something I admire greatly, when in many ways a lot of brands focus on a single component, without spending more attention and time on the rest of the timepiece as a whole. And I must say, I think it would be fair to say that these watches are something of an acquired taste, with a very peculiar colour palette in terms of the bright metals used, from yellow gold to pink gold, although some more subdued platinums are also available. But these pieces are very much the top end of luxury, but exhibit care and are somehow remarkably tasteful despite their exaggerated forms and lines, simply because that's what they're designed to be. They're not built to be ostentatious, but rather just to be built to be spectacular, which is something I respect enormously in the world of diamond-encrusted Rolexes. And alongside the HM range of watches, which incorporates the HM7, my favourite, the wonderful Aquapod and its incredible curved form, which celebrates everything about the dive watch, but also the aquatic life in terms of a jellyfish. This was followed rather in 2011 by the LM, or the Legacy Machine range. And these are far more classically inspired and much more in line with, for example, F.P.Journe, in terms of taking inspiration from 18th century horology and producing gorgeous pieces with flying balance wheels and separate escapements, with the balance wheel being placed above the dial and the escapement below, which is a very difficult feat to achieve and is a testament to the care and quality of these timepieces. And my admiration for this brand is only further augmented by their care when it comes to producing fascinatingly complex pieces, yet still having a sense of humour. Because I find in a lot of cases, a lot of brands don't really have much of a sense of humour in terms of producing a timepiece, which is very serious in terms of operating within its functionality, and also representing their brand in a favourable light. But in this case, MB&F are willing to play with the design, which is something I very much appreciate, because it does show a brand which is willing to listen to the customer and really work to produce something interesting and different. And this is epitomised by their clocks, for example, their freestanding clocks, for example, their version of a rocket with an astronaut that climbs a ladder, which is something beautiful and peculiar, which just adds to the wonder of these timepieces as mesmerising pieces, rather than simply a functional wristwatch. And so it's little surprise I included MB&F in this list, as a brand I spoke to at Baselworld 2017, who are absolutely charming in terms of showing their watches, and really explaining the basic information, and indeed the basic inspiration behind these watches, as far as beautiful and innovative pieces of art and technology merged together are. And so I'll conclude this video here, but do leave your comments down below as to what you thought of my choices, and indeed if you think that there are other brands which also would have deserved a position on this list. And I certainly don't view this list as comprehensive, but rather just a little insight into a few brands which I feel don't receive enough attention, and which are truly wonderful brands in their own right, and which should be respected for what they produce. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel, and to be able to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm the Watch Guy, over and out.